That morning, I chose to walk the streets of Washington alone. No entourage, no cameras, just me and the damp sidewalk still glistening from the night's rain. There was something calming about the city at dawn, something that reminded me of simpler times, when power felt like service, not spectacle. I wasn't searching for anything, not really. But sometimes, life has a way of placing the unexpected directly in your path. As I rounded a quiet corner near a row of weather-worn houses, I heard it, a sharp crack of glass shattering. I stopped mid-step. The sound wasn't just loud, it was purposeful. I moved closer, instinct tightening in my chest that a modest two-story house stood just ahead. Its front window had been fractured, shards glittering on the porch like ice. In the yard stood a woman, her face pale with shock, her hands trembling at her sides. And then I saw them, 3 boys, no older than 10, ducking behind a trash bin, giggling like they had just pulled the world's greatest prank. One still had a small rock clenched in his hand. The woman called out to them, but they bolted down the sidewalk, their laughter fading like a bad joke. She turned and went inside, only to return moments later with her phone pressed to her ear. Police, I assumed. As she spoke, her voice cracked, not with fear, but with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite understand why this was happening in her quiet little life that I stayed back, hidden in the curve of a hedge. A patrol car arrived within minutes, 2 officers stepping out with casual, almost sleepy movements. They spoke to her briefly, then looked down the street in the direction the boys had run. But no chase followed, no stern warning. After a few minutes, they got back in their cruiser and drove off. I could see it on her face as they left, an expression I'd seen too often in this country. Abandonment dressed as procedure. That's when I stepped forward. She recognized me instantly, though she didn't say my name. Her posture straightened, a flicker of confusion cutting through her grief. I asked her what had happened, and she told me. I asked if she knew who the boys were, and she nodded. They live 2 blocks down. Everyone knows it. I thanked her and walked away. But I didn't go far. I made a few calls. Within the hour, the parents of those boys were standing in front of me. 3 couples, none of them particularly apologetic. I laid it out plainly, their children had committed an act of property damage. It wasn't harmless fun, it was vandalism. And someone had to pay for it. I showed them the estimate I'd just received from a nearby repair shop, $1,200. A fair price for the glass, the frame, and the installation. One of the fathers scoffed. That's not our problem, he said. They're just kids. Kids, I replied, don't grow into decent men by being taught they're above consequence. They refuse to pay. All of them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten them, not at first. But I did make one thing very clear, if they would not assume responsibility, I would take matters to family court. The words felt heavier than they should have, but I meant them. If you continue to act like these children have no parents, I said, don't be surprised when the law decides to agree with you. That got their attention. Still, I could see defiance simmering behind their eyes. So I handed each of them a new document, an updated fine, $5,000 per household. Civil penalties for neglecting parental responsibility. Legal, justified, and absolutely enforceable. Only one of them tried to protest. The rest just stared. The woman whose window had been destroyed was watching from her porch. She looked at me as if I'd done something heroic. I hadn't. I had simply done what the system wouldn't. Later that day, she invited me into her home for dinner. I declined, but she insisted. She said it was the least she could do. The house smelled of fresh herbs and warm spices. She served me roast chicken, potatoes, and a ruby-red glass of cherry compote. I drank it without a second thought. Within minutes, I felt it, tightness in my chest, heat rising up my neck. I'd forgotten about my cherry allergy. Something I hadn't had a reaction to in decades. My vision blurred. She called for help. The paramedics arrived fast, but not fast enough to stop the spiral completely. I spent the next 2 days in a hospital bed. Hooked to monitors, tubes in my arms. The doctors said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a man who had tried to do the right thing, and nearly paid the price for it with his life, but when I left that hospital, the window on her house had already been replaced. Paid in full. By me, the hospital let me go with the usual warnings: watch for dizziness, avoid allergens, take these pills with food. But I wasn't thinking about my health. Not really. My mind was back on that house, that street, and those 3 boys whose parents thought rules were suggestions. As the doors slid shut behind me and I stepped into the sunlight, a thought lingered: justice, when delayed, becomes permission. And I wasn't about to let that happen. That I returned to the neighborhood the next morning. The woman, her name was Elena, saw me from her porch and came out with a cautious smile. I reassured her I wasn't there to eat anything this time. She apologized again for what happened. I told her it wasn't her fault. Allergies, like justice, can be unpredictable. But I had a different purpose now. Not reaction. Resolution. The window had been beautifully restored, thicker glass, a new frame, and even a subtle design etched into the pane. I had it commissioned while still in the hospital. A small tree, its branches stretching upward. A symbol of roots. Of growth. And consequences. I didn't know you cared this much, she said softly. I don't, I answered. I care more. She didn't ask what that meant. I think she understood. By noon, I had what I needed: statements from witnesses, the police report, the repair invoice. But more importantly, I had the evidence of indifference, the true rot. I wasn't interested in punishing children, not really. I was interested in challenging the adults who were failing them. The parents had assumed the storm had passed. But I was just the calm between gusts. That I contacted a district mediator. Explained the situation, provided documentation, and requested a formal civic arbitration. The parents were summoned. They arrived late, arms crossed, postures defiant. But this time, they weren't met with a single man on a sidewalk. They faced a room, a process, and a precedent. That I made my case calmly, without theatrics. Just the facts. The vandalism. The refusal to pay. The escalation. Then, I looked each of them in the eye and said, this isn't about money. It's about accountability. If your children had hit a person instead of a window, would we still be having this discussion? That silenced the room. One of the fathers looked away. One of the mothers blinked rapidly, her hands gripping her purse. The mediator nodded and confirmed what I already knew: the fine would stand. But it wouldn't go to me. It would go toward the neighborhood, repairs, community programs, a mentorship fund. I was already planning the next part before they'd even signed the agreement. A week later, I returned to the house. Elena was in her garden, planting what looked like tomatoes. She stood and dusted her hands on her apron when she saw me. They paid, she said. I know. She tilted her head. What are you going to do now? I smiled. I'm going to teach their kids something their parents never did. I called in a few favors, and by the end of the week, a local community center had agreed to host a youth workshop: basic ethics, civic duty, and yes, a little manual labor. The 3 boys were required to attend as part of the arbitration ruling. They didn't like it. At first. But something changed when we started talking about respect not as a punishment, but as a skill. We scrubbed graffiti. Painted fences. Cleaned up old lots. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and when the youngest boy looked up at me after painting a wall and asked, "Why do you care?" I gave him the only honest answer I had: because someone has to. Their parents never showed up. Not once. But the boys did. Every session. Something was shifting, not fast, but steady. Like a tree pushing through cracked concrete. One night, after the final session, I sat on the porch of Elena's house. She brought out 2 mugs of herbal tea. I took one, carefully. No cherries this time. We watched the street, the lamplight casting long shadows, I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Then don't," I replied. "Just keep that window open. Let the light in." She nodded and we sat in silence, the kind that means everything's finally still, but I knew better than to believe the story was over. It never is. The workshops were over. The fines had been paid. Elena's window stood whole again, framed by curtains that now always seemed to catch the light. By all measures, it should have ended there. A neat resolution, tied with a bow. But as I've learned, truth rarely comes wrapped like that. It lingers. It twists. And sometimes it returns wearing a new face that a month had passed since that final evening on Elena's porch when I received an unexpected call. It was from the principal of a nearby elementary school. Her voice was taut with urgency, but also curiosity. "Mr. Trump," she said, "I believe you know 3 of our students very well." I said nothing. I didn't need to. "There's something you should see." I arrived that afternoon, unannounced, dressed in my usual low-profile attire. The school sat nestled between rows of dull apartment blocks, forgotten by most politicians unless a camera crew was involved. But when I stepped through those doors, something felt strangely alert. Teachers paused in the hallways. Whispers floated behind me like leaves on the wind. And then, I saw it. In the school auditorium, under dim flickering lights, hung a mural. Not large, not professionally made. Just a wide sheet of brown paper pinned to the wall. On it, painted by small, unsteady hands, were a series of images: a broken window, a man standing alone beneath it, 3 boys scrubbing graffiti. At the bottom, the words, "A mistake is only forever if no one learns from it." I stood motionless. "They did this?" I asked. The principal nodded. "They wouldn't say who helped them. But we know." I wanted to feel proud, or maybe relieved. But what I felt was weight, an anchor of understanding. Because while the boys had learned something, their parents had not. 2 days later, news broke. One of the fathers, the same man who had scoffed at the idea of paying a fine, had been caught in a property dispute. Not vandalism. Something worse. It turned out he'd been threatening a neighbor over a shared fence, and when the neighbor pushed back, he responded with a rock. Familiar, isn't it? I watched the footage. Grainy. Distant. But clear enough. And in his son's face, standing there, silent, I saw something deeper than fear. I saw recognition. Like he had already seen this scene play out before. Because he had, that was the moment I realized the story hadn't been about the boys. Not truly. It was about the echoes. What we leave behind, what we repeat. And how sometimes, the lesson we fail to teach becomes the weapon our children inherit. So I went back, not to Elena's house. Not to the school that I returned to each home of those 3 families. I didn't knock. I didn't step inside. I left a letter. Handwritten. Each one identical, save for the name, "This isn't over." Not because of what your child did. But because of what you didn't. If you're ready to change that, I'll be at the community center every Thursday at 6. Not for them, for you. The door will be open. The question is, will you be the one who walks through it? The next Thursday, I waited. I expected no one. But at 6:17 p.m., the door creaked. That it wasn't all 3. Just one. The mother. The one who had clutched her purse so tightly during the mediation hearing. She sat down slowly. Her voice was small. "He's different now," she said. And I realized. I wasn't. She stayed for the whole session. We talked about responsibility. About silence. About what children remember. And before she left, she asked if she could bring someone next time, her husband. The weeks that followed weren't public. They weren't dramatic. But they were honest. One by one, they came. The parents. The ones who had refused to pay, refused to believe, refused to bend. They weren't proud. But they were present, and sometimes, that's where redemption begins, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet admission that we are not who we should be, yet, weeks turned into months. The Thursday meetings at the community center grew, not in number, but in depth. We weren't building a crowd, we were rebuilding a foundation. The parents, who once saw me as an enemy, now saw something else. Not a savior. Not even a leader. Just a man who refused to look away. I never lectured them. I asked questions. I let silence do its work. It was strange, in a way. I had been in rooms full of world leaders, media tycoons, billionaires, and yet, some of the most honest conversations I've ever witnessed happened under fluorescent lights above a scratched linoleum floor, while folding chairs squeaked and a forgotten coffee pot steamed quietly in the corner. The children changed first. That much was clear. The smallest one, Leo, who once hid behind the others, began showing up at the center long after the workshops had ended. He started sweeping the front steps before anyone arrived. One day, he brought his own broom. No one told him to. No one praised him for it. And yet, there he was. It reminded me of something an old mentor once said: when character grows in the dark, the world begins to change in the light. But peace, as I've come to know, doesn't last without challenge. News spread that I had been holding these meetings. Some viewed it as noble. Others, predictably, saw it as overreach. A local blogger accused me of wielding guilt like a gavel, of using influence to shame lower-income families into submission. It wasn't the criticism that bothered me. It was the way others clung to it, how quickly people choose pride over repair when repair costs them. Reflection point: one morning, I returned to the center to find graffiti sprawled across its entrance. Trump's court, it read in red paint, dripping like mock blood. There was more, vulgar and bitter, but the message was clear: not everyone wanted healing. Some just wanted to hurt. That I didn't call the police. Instead, I waited. That evening, as the parents arrived, I didn't mention it. But Leo did. He stood by the door, staring at the defaced wall, his brow furrowed in confusion. Why would someone do that? He asked. That I knelt beside him. Sometimes, I said, people don't destroy what they hate. They destroy what scares them. He blinked. But it's just paint. No, I replied, it's a mirror. The next day, Leo came back with a can of primer paint. Not his parents. Just him. I helped him open it. Together, in silence, we painted over every word, but what happened after, no one expected. Point: one of the parents, the very same father who once refused to pay the fine, approached the center the following week. In his hands was a small box. Inside, 3 handwritten letters, one from each of the boys. Apologies. Not guided by lawyers or threats, but by something rarer: understanding. Alongside them, a photo. The boys standing beside the now pristine wall, smiling. And something else taped to the bottom of the box: a check. Not large. But enough. It simply read, for the next window. That night, Elena invited me over again. This time, I accepted. No food. No danger. Just tea and quiet. She told me the neighborhood felt different now. Not fixed, she said, but awake. And I agreed. As we sat there, I looked out her window, the very one that started it all. It was dark outside, but inside the glass was a reflection. Not of me. Of Leo. Sweeping the center steps under a flickering street lamp. Alone. Focused. Determined. Sometimes, I thought, justice doesn't come from power or punishment. Sometimes, it begins with a broken window, and a boy who decides to clean up the mess. The wind had begun to shift by the time autumn settled into Washington. You could feel it in the mornings, cooler, slower, like the city was exhaling something it had held too long. On that final Thursday, I arrived at the community center earlier than usual. The room was still dark, chairs unstacked, the old thermostat groaning to life like an elderly guardian waking from slumber. I didn't expect a crowd. I never did. But what happened that night was different. The door opened slowly. One by one, the families arrived, not just the parents or the children, but both. Together. Some brought baked goods. Others brought nothing but presents. One brought a painting, a child's handprint tree, the roots twisting downward, the branches lifting like arms in prayer. I stared at it for a long time. There was no plaque. No explanation. Just the image. And somehow, that said more. Elena came too, this time not as a victim, but as a neighbor. She had become part of the meetings in her own quiet way, baking cookies, offering advice, helping the children with homework in the corners of the room. She stood near the doorway, watching everything as though measuring the shape of something unseen. When I caught her eye, she smiled, then nodded toward the boys. They had changed, not completely. Not perfectly. But undeniably. There was a stillness to them now, a pause between action and impulse. And that pause, that second of thought, was everything that as the meeting began. I chose not to speak. Instead, I sat in the back and listened. One father stood. The one who once refused to pay, who had faced me with scorn and ridicule. He cleared his throat, then turned to the others. I used to think shame was punishment, he said. But it turns out it's a compass, if you don't ignore it. He sat down without waiting for applause. There was none. Just silence. Respectful. Later, Leo approached me. He had something in his hands, a folded note. He looked nervous. "It's for you," he said, and slipped away before I could ask a single question. When I opened it, I read, "I didn't think you cared. Then I thought you cared too much. Now I think you care exactly the right amount. Thank you for fixing what we broke, that wasn't glass." I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket. It's still there. That evening ended not with a speech or a ceremony, but with lights turning off, chairs being stacked, and a quiet walk home beneath a sky so clear it almost felt intentional. Sometimes, the most powerful ending is no ending at all, just a soft transition into something better. Weeks passed. The boys returned to school. The parents, now volunteers, started new projects in the neighborhood. Elena's garden grew thick with herbs and autumn vegetables. And the community center? We gave it a new name, the window room. Every Thursday, it remained open. Not for punishments. Not for judgments. But for reminders. Of what we'd nearly lost. And what we had learned to protect. And me. I stepped back, not out of guilt, or shame, or fear, but because I had done what I came to do. That I didn't fix everything that I didn't need to. I just made sure the cracks stopped spreading. And when people ask me why I walked those streets that morning, why I got involved with broken glass and reluctant parents and stubborn kids, I tell them this, because in a city built on power, I saw something more powerful. A boy with a broom. And the courage to use it.